The cake had 36 candles on it, one for every year my wife had been gone, plus my age divided by 2, which was my granddaughter's idea of a joke from when she was 9 and had stuck around for 12 more birthdays after that. I'd turned 72 that Saturday in October. The leaves out front of my house in Wilmington were doing that thing where they go orange at the tips and stay green in the middle, like they couldn't decide whether to commit. I remember thinking that as I stood at my own kitchen counter, watching my daughter Brenna pour coffee for her husband Dale, and I remember the exact moment I realized my own daughter was about to rob me blind. She thought she was whispering. She wasn't, not really. She had that hiss women get when they're trying to be quiet, but their teeth are clenched. Dale was bent over the sink, rinsing his mug, my mug actually, the one with the chip on the handle that my wife bought at a yard sale in 1988. And Brenna leaned in toward his shoulder and said, "I'll keep him here till 4. You take Tucker's truck. The locksmith said he'd meet you at the curb." Dale nodded without turning around. I was standing maybe 12 feet away on the other side of the breakfast bar, holding a paper plate with a slice of grocery store cake on it. Yellow cake, chocolate frosting. I'd been about to ask Brenna if she wanted the corner piece, because she always liked the corner piece. Instead, I just stood there with a plate in my hand and felt my stomach drop down through my shoes and into the basement. The locksmith. At my house. My house. My house. Now, I want to back up here, because if I tell it the way it landed, you'll think I was a fool. And I was. I was a fool for a long time. But there was a road that led to that kitchen, and you have to walk it with me a little bit, or none of what came after will make sense. My wife passed in November of 2014. Pancreatic. We had 10 weeks from the diagnosis to the funeral, and most of those weeks I spent sitting in a vinyl chair next to a hospital bed reading her the obituaries from the news journal, because she liked to know who was going. Her name was Colleen. We were married 41 years. I have not, in the 11 years since, gone a single day without thinking that I would trade the rest of my time on earth for one more Sunday morning with her in the kitchen, her in that ratty blue robe, me pretending to read the paper. We had one child, Brenna, born in 1979 when I was 26 and Colleen was 24, and we lived in a duplex on Lovering Avenue with a furnace that quit every February. Brenna was a serious little girl, quiet. She read books at recess instead of playing Foursquare. By the time she was 30, she was a paralegal in Philadelphia, and by 34, she'd married Dale, who managed a chain of 3 carpet stores in South Jersey. I liked Dale. I want to say that plainly because it matters. I liked him for a long time. He laughed at my jokes. He'd changed the oil in my Buick when I asked. He called Colleen Mom without making a big deal out of it. When Colleen got sick, Dale was the one who drove the 4 hours to Hopkins twice a week so she could see the specialist. Brenna couldn't do it. Brenna had panic attacks in hospitals, so when Colleen died, and I sat in our kitchen alone for about 6 months, staring at the wallpaper, and Brenna finally came down one Saturday and said, "Dad, we need to think about your future." I listened. She brought paperwork. She brought a friend of hers from the firm, a man named Russell Hatch, who specialized in something called elder estate planning. They sat at my dining room table and explained that I needed a financial power of attorney just in case I had a stroke, just in case I got dementia, just in case I fell in the shower. They said it didn't transfer anything. They said it just meant that if I was incapacitated, somebody could pay my electric bill for me. I asked who'd have it. Brenna said her. I asked what about Dale. She said, well, Dale too, as a backup, because what if she was traveling for work? She and Dale would be co-agents. Russell nodded along. I signed. I'm going to say that one more time, because I want anyone listening to hear me. I signed a durable financial power of attorney in the state of Delaware in 2015, 6 months after I buried my wife. naming my daughter and my son-in-law as co-agents. I did not get my own lawyer. I did not read all 4 pages. I trusted them because I had nobody else left to trust, and the truth is I would have signed anything that day if you'd asked me to, because grief makes you stupid. Anybody who's been through it knows what I'm saying. For 9 years, nothing happened. The POA sat in a folder in Brenner's office in Wayne. I lived my life. I retired from DuPont in 2017 after 38 years as a process engineer. I had a pension, plus Social Security, plus an IRA. My financial advisor at Vanguard had been growing since the Reagan administration, plus the house, which Colleen and I had paid off in 2009. I was, by the standards of a guy who grew up in a row home in Marcus Hook, a comfortable man, not a rich one, but comfortable. Then last spring, things shifted. Dale started showing up at the house on weekday afternoons. He'd say he was in the area. Wilmington is not in the area when you live in Cherry Hill, but I let it go. He'd ask me about my health. Was I sleeping? Was I forgetting things? Did I want him to help me organize my financial papers? I said no. I had a guy at Vanguard who handled all that. Dale would smile and say, "Sure, Dad, sure." In June, Brenner called and asked if she and Dale could come down for a family conversation. They sat in my living room, and Brenner told me, in the voice she used when she was 8, and trying to convince me she hadn't broken the lamp, that Dale's carpet stores were going through a rough patch. She used the phrase cash flow situation. She said they were going to need to do some creative thinking about family resources. I asked how much. Dale jumped in. He said, "Waltz, Dad, we'd never ask you for anything, but the equity in this house is just sitting here, you know, and you don't need a 4-bedroom. We were thinking, what if we explored some options? There are programs." He said the word programs like it was a magic spell. I told him I'd think about it. I walked them to the door. After they left, I sat on my front step for 2 hours and watched a squirrel try to figure out the bird feeder. Then I did something I had not done in 9 years. I called my friend Carol Marston. Carol had been Colleen's best friend since the late 70s, when they both taught 2nd grade at Lewis Elementary. After Colleen died, Carol had sort of adopted me in the way some women adopt widowers. Calls every Sunday, dropped off a chicken pot pie every other Wednesday, told me when I needed a haircut. Carol's husband had been a tax attorney in Wilmington for 40 years before he died of a heart attack in 2019. Carol had connections. Carol knew where the bodies were buried in this town, and I mean that almost literally because she buried 2 husbands. I told Carol about the visit. I told her about Dale and the programs. I told her about the POA I'd signed 9 years ago and basically forgotten about. Carol was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Honey, Walter, listen to me. You need to call Phil Donahue." Phil Donahue was not the talk show host. Phil Donahue was a real estate and elder law attorney who'd shared an office suite with Carol's late husband for 20 years. Carol set up the meeting for the following Tuesday. Phil was about my age. White hair, tortoiseshell glasses, wore a bow tie, which I respected. He sat behind his desk and listened to me explain everything for 40 minutes without saying a word, just nodding and writing on a yellow legal pad. When I was done, he set down his pen, took off his glasses, rubbed his eyes, and said, "Walter, I'm going to ask you a series of questions. I need you to answer them honestly, and I need you to understand that the answers are going to determine what we do next. Have you, in the past 9 years, given Brenner or Dale access to any of your accounts? Checking, savings, investment, anything?" I said no. "Has either of them been a signatory on anything? Co-owner of the deed? Listed as a beneficiary on accounts other than your will?" I said the only thing was Brenner was the beneficiary on my IRA and on the small life insurance policy I'd taken out in 1992. "Have you signed anything else they brought you ever? Any document, any form, any letter, even something they said was just routine. I started to say no. Then I stopped. There had been a thing 2 summers ago. Dale had brought over some papers. He said it was an update to the POA, just bringing it up to current Delaware standards because the law had changed. He'd said his lawyer had drafted it. I'd signed at the kitchen table. I'd had 2 beers. I told Phil this. Phil put his glasses back on very slowly. "Walter," he said, "I need you to do exactly what I tell you to do for the next 48 hours. Do not call your daughter. Do not call your son-in-law. Do not change your routine. Do not move any money. Do not, under any circumstances, sign another piece of paper. Can you do that for me?" I said I could. What Phil Donahue uncovered over the next 11 days, with the help of a forensic accountant named Yvonne Kasperzak, whose card I still have in my wallet, was this. The update Dale had me sign in the summer of 2023 was not an update. It was a brand new power of attorney that revoked the one from 2015 and replaced it with a general durable POA that gave Dale alone, not Brenner, just Dale, broad authority over my financial affairs, including the ability to sell, transfer, or encumber real property, and the ability to act on my behalf in transactions with financial institutions. It had been notarized by a woman who worked at a UPS store in Glassboro, New Jersey, and who, when Yvonne tracked her down, admitted that Dale had handed her the documents already signed and told her I'd signed them in front of him at his kitchen table the day before. She'd notarized it for $20. Phil pulled the records on my house. The deed was still in my name, and here's where I had to sit down in his office and ask for a glass of water. Dale had, 3 months earlier, in July, used the POA to take out a home equity line of credit against my house for $385,000. The application listed me as the borrower. It listed Dale as my legal representative under the POA. The funds had been deposited into an account at a credit union in Cherry Hill that I had never heard of, and that Yvonne traced back, through about 6 layers of nonsense, to a holding company Dale had set up in Delaware in March. The mortgage statements were going to a P.O. box in Newark, Delaware, that Dale had rented in my name in April. I had not received a single piece of mail about any of it. Phil also, with my permission, called Vanguard. My IRA, thank God, was untouched. The carpet stores had not yet been desperate enough, or Dale had not yet been bold enough to make a move on the retirement accounts. But Yvonne told me, sitting across from me in Phil's conference room with a stack of printouts in front of her, that based on the pattern she was seeing, the IRA was next. She said probably within 90 days. She said, and I'm quoting her now, "Mr. the quoting, Ashby, your son-in-law is in the kind of debt that doesn't come from carpet stores." I asked what kind that was. She said, "The kind with names attached to it." That stopped me cold. So here's where we get back to my birthday, which is where this whole thing started, and where I started to pay you back for sitting through all that backstory. By the time my 72nd birthday rolled around in October, I had been working with Phil and Yvonne for almost 4 months. I had not changed a single thing visible on the outside of my life. I still called Brenner on Wednesdays. I still let Dale drop by. I still signed nothing, that part I held to like grim death. But when they asked, I'd say I needed to think about it, or I'd lost the paperwork, or my eyes were bothering me and could we go over it next week? I played dumb, not feeble. Phil specifically warned me not to act feeble because that gave them ammunition for a guardianship petition, and that was a road we did not want to go down. Just slow, forgetful in small ways, not totally with it on the financial stuff. The kind of thing a man my age can absolutely get away with. What I was actually doing in the meantime was the following. With Phil's help, I had drafted and executed a formal revocation of all powers of attorney, signed and notarized at Phil's office, and Phil had personally hand-delivered notice of revocation to Dale's attorney, to the credit union in Cherry Hill, to the bank that had issued the HELOC, and to every financial institution Dale had touched. The HELOC had been frozen pending an investigation into possible fraud. Yvonne had filed a SAR, a suspicious activity report, with FinCEN. I had filed a police report with the Wilmington PD and a separate one with the New Jersey State Police regarding the notary fraud, which is a felony in both states. I had executed a new will leaving everything to Carol's grandkids and the Boys and Girls Club of Delaware, with a specific clause disinheriting Brenna by name for reasons known to her. I had moved my checking account to a credit union Dale had never heard of, set up a new safe deposit box, and changed the locks on my own house in September, while Brenna and Dale were on a long weekend in Atlantic City. The locks on my own house, 3 weeks before they tried to change them. That's the part that, even now, I have trouble talking about without my throat closing up. They were going to walk into my house. The house Colleen and I bought in 1981 with a VA loan and lived in for 33 years, and where she came home to die. They were going to walk in there with a locksmith, and they were going to change my locksmith, and they were going to change my locks. And I would have come home from my own birthday party to find that I could not get into my own front door. That was the plan. That was what my daughter, the little girl I taught to ride a bike in the cul-de-sac on Edgemore Road, had whispered to her husband over my kitchen sink while I stood 12 feet away holding a piece of cake. So, when I heard her say it, I did not react. That was the hardest thing I have ever done in my life, including watching my wife die. I did not react. I set the cake down. I smiled. I said, "Brenna, honey, my back is killing me. Would you mind if I sat down for a minute?" She practically tripped over herself, helping me to the recliner. Solicitous. Sweet. Her hand on my shoulder. I asked Dale if he was heading out, and he said yeah. He had a meeting with a contractor. I asked him to swing by the Wawa on his way back and pick up a half-gallon of milk. He said sure. He grabbed his keys. What Dale didn't know, as he got in his Tahoe and drove the 17 minutes to my house on Edgemore Road, was 3 things. First, my locks have been changed 3 weeks ago. New deadbolts. New keys. Phil had a copy. Carol had a copy. I had a copy. Nobody else on God's green earth had a copy. Second, I had a ring camera on the front porch, a ring camera over the garage, and a third camera, a real one, the kind that records to a hard drive mounted in the eaves above the side door. Phil's investigator had installed all 3 in August. They were motion activated. They went straight to a server in Phil's office. Third, the Wilmington Police Department had been notified in writing 2 weeks earlier that an attempt to enter my residence by my son-in-law on or around my birthday was anticipated, and that any such attempt should be treated as a burglary in progress. Phil had a friend in the department, a detective named Marcus Bell. Detective Bell had taken it seriously. Detective Bell had a unit 2 blocks away. While Dale was driving to my house with a locksmith named, I am not making this up, Vinny, I sat in my recliner and let my daughter make me a cup of decaf and ask me about my hip. We talked about the weather. We talked about her cousin's wedding. She asked me, twice, if I was feeling all right. Did I want to lie down? Did I want to take a nap? I said no. I was fine. I was just enjoying the company. About 40 minutes after Dale left, my phone rang. I'd put it on the side table. Brenna glanced at it. The screen said, Dow. I picked it up. I have replayed this phone call in my head probably 400 times. Dale's voice on the other end was, there's no other word for it, small. He said, Wart, something's wrong at the house. There's people here. Cops, the locks are. Walt, the locks are different. I said, Dale, slow down. What's going on? He said, Walt, did you know cops were going to be here? Did you change the locks? I looked across the room at my daughter. She was holding her coffee cup with both hands. Her eyes were on me. I said into the phone loud enough for her to hear, "Dale, I have no idea what you're talking about. Why would you be at my house?" The silence on the other end of that line lasted maybe 3 seconds. It was the longest 3 seconds of Dale's life. I watched Brenna's face during those 3 seconds. I watched the color leave it. I watched her understand in real time that her husband had just said something into a phone that her father had heard, and that there was no version of the story where she came out of this hole. She set her coffee cup down very carefully on the coaster. She stood up. She said, "Dad." "Dad, I can explain." I said, "Brenna, sit down." She sat down. I said, "Dale's been arrested by now, hasn't he? Or he will be in the next 4 minutes. They've had a unit on standby since this morning. The locksmith. Vinny, is it? Vinny is going to cooperate, because Vinny's not going to do federal time over a $400 lock job. Dale is going to be charged with attempted burglary, criminal trespass, and conspiracy. The HELOC fraud is a separate matter. That's federal." The notary in Glassboro. She gave a statement 2 weeks ago. Yvonne Kaspruzak's report has been forwarded to the U.S. Attorney's Office in Camden. Phil thinks Dale is looking at 5 to 7 years. The carpet stores are going to be liquidated to pay restitution. I was watching her face the whole time I said this. She had stopped breathing. I'm not exaggerating. She was sitting on my couch with her mouth slightly open and her chest was not moving. I said, "I revoked the POA in July, the new one, the one Dale had me sign in 2023, drunk. That's been declared a forgery, or close enough to one that no court is going to enforce it. The notary's already turned. Yvonne traced the money. It's all in a file, Brenna. It's all in a file as thick as a phone book, sitting on Phil Donahue's desk." She started to cry. Not the way a little girl cries. The way a 46-year-old woman cries when she finally understands she is going to prison. She said, "Daddy." She had not called me Daddy since she was 11 years old. I said, "Don't." She said, "Daddy, I didn't want to. He made me. The money, the people he owes. Dad, you don't understand. They were going to." I said, "Brenna, I want you to hear me. I'm not going to ask you what they were going to do. I don't care. You stood in my kitchen on my birthday and you told your husband to change the locks on my house. You were going to lock me out. Your father. You were going to lock me out of the house your mother died in." She put her face in her hands. I said, "I have one question for you and I want a true answer. Was your mother's ring part of this?" Colleen's wedding ring. I'd given it to Brenna in 2017 when she got engaged to Dale because Colleen had wanted her to have it. Brenna had been wearing it on a chain around her neck for 8 years. Brenna's hand went to her throat. The chain was there. The ring was not. She said, very quietly, "He sold it in April." I nodded. I had figured Yvonne had pulled the records on a pawn shop in Camden 3 weeks earlier, and a ring matching the description had moved through there in April for $1,100. Phil had bought it back the next day for $15. It was sitting in Phil's safe. I didn't tell her that. I didn't tell her for a long time. I let her sit on that couch and think she had lost the last piece of her mother she had a right to. Detective Bell called me at 3:47 p.m. Dale was in custody. Vinny the locksmith was, as predicted, cooperating fully. The HELOC funds had been frozen at the credit union. About $119,000 of the $385,000 was recoverable. The rest had gone to a man in Camden whose nickname, Yvonne told me later, was Tony Pockets. And from there, it had become unrecoverable in the way that money becomes unrecoverable when it changes hands in places without security cameras. I lost $195,000. I want to say that part plainly, too. The bank ate some of it. The insurance covered some. But I lost real money. Money Colleen and I had saved while she clipped coupons, and I drove a 1994 Buick LeSabre for 16 years. Money that was supposed to be Brenner's eventually. Dale pleaded out in March. 6 years, federal facility in Pennsylvania. Brenner was not charged criminally. Phil and the AUSA decided there wasn't enough to prove she'd known about the HELOC, and the conspiracy on the locks alone was not worth the trial. But she lost her paralegal license. The state bar had questions. So did her firm. She works at a Marshall's in King of Prussia now, last I heard. I did not see her for 14 months. Then last August, on what would have been Colleen's 75th birthday, she showed up at my front door. She'd lost weight. Her hair was different. She stood on my porch, and she did not ask to come in. She said, "Dad, I am so sorry. I will not bother you again, but I needed you to know that I am sorry, in person, while I still have the courage." I looked at her for a long time. I thought about Colleen. I thought about what Colleen would have done. I went inside. I went to the safe in my bedroom closet. I took out a small velvet box. I came back to the door. I put it in her hand. I said, "Your mother wanted you to have this." I'm honoring her. I'm not honoring you. Don't confuse the two. I closed the door. She was on the porch for another 20 minutes. I watched her on the Ring camera. She sat on the top step and she opened the box and she held that ring in her hand and she cried like a child for 20 minutes. Then she got up and she walked to her car and she drove away. I have not heard from her since. I think about her every day. I will think about her every day until I die. Carol and I got married last May. Quiet ceremony, 41 people. Phil Donahue gave a toast. Yvonne came down from Philadelphia. We honeymooned in Cape May because that's where Colleen and I went in 1973. And Carol said she liked the symmetry of it, and I loved her more in that moment than I knew was possible at 73. What I want to leave you with is this. They thought I was the prize. They thought the house was the prize. They thought the equity was the prize, and the IRA and the pension and the ring around my dead wife's neck on my daughter's chain. They thought every dollar I had was a thing they could take if they were just clever enough about it. But the prize, the actual prize, was something they never even saw. The prize was 41 years with a woman who taught second grade at Lewis Elementary. The prize was a friend named Carol who, after I lost her, stayed. The prize was a lawyer with a bow tie who picked up his phone on a Tuesday. The prize was the 38 years I spent working a job I was good at for a company that gave me a pension I earned. They couldn't steal any of that. They didn't even know it existed. That's why people like them lose in the end, even when they win on paper. They are looking at the wrong prize. And me? Well, I'm 73 this October. My back hurts. My new wife thinks I drink too much coffee. The leaves out front are doing that thing again. Orange at the tips and green in the middle. And this year, for the first time in 12 years, I'm not eating my birthday cake alone. That's the whole story. That's what they tried to take, and that's what they couldn't. I sit on my front porch most mornings now with a second cup of coffee. Phyllis says I shouldn't be drinking, and I try to make sense of how a man gets from there to here. How my own daughter, the little girl I taught to ride a bike on Edgemore Road, ends up standing in my kitchen on my 72nd birthday and whispering to her husband about the locks on my front door. I've turned it over in my head 1,000 times, and what I keep coming back to is this. Nothing in that kitchen happened by accident. Every single piece of it was paid for in advance by something I did or didn't do over the previous 9 years. I trusted without verifying. That's the truth of it. When Sienna and Roland sat at my dining room table in 2015 and slid that power of attorney across to me, I signed it without my own lawyer in the room because I was lonely and broken, and I wanted to believe my family loved me. That signature was the seed of everything that came after. The law of cause and effect doesn't care about your feelings. It doesn't care that you just buried your wife. It records what you signed, and it waits. But here's the other thing I've learned, and it's the part I want any man my age to hear. The cause and effect goes both ways. The same 9 years where I was being slowly set up for the kill were also 9 years where I was building, without knowing it, the things that saved me. I kept Phyllis as a friend when it would have been easier to drift apart after Colleen died. I stayed honest with the man at Vanguard who handled my retirement. I treated my neighbors well. I kept my word, even on small things. None of that felt like much at the time. It felt like just being a decent guy. But when the hour came, those small deposits paid me back in ways I never planned for. Phyllis knew Phil Donahue. Phil knew a detective. The detective took me seriously. A whole rescue rope woven over decades just from being the kind of man who returns phone calls. So if you're listening to me tell this, and maybe you've got a Sienna in your life, or a Roland, or maybe just a bad feeling at the kitchen sink that won't quit, let me leave you with 3 things. Be decent, because decency is a savings account that pays out when you need it most. Be sharp, because love is no substitute for a careful eye on the paperwork, and trust without verification is just a slower kind of theft. And be tough enough to act when the moment comes, even when the person you have to act against is someone you used to read bedtime stories to. That last one is the hardest. It nearly killed me to sit in that recliner and let Sienna pour me coffee while I knew what I knew. But I did it, not because I'm strong, because I'd run out of any other way to love her honestly. The prize they were chasing was never the real prize. The real prize is the kind of man you become while they're not looking.